Hello everybody, I'm Nick. In this video you're going to learn how to correctly and properly send email in .NET and C#. And when I say properly and correctly, I mean it. This is not just about getting the SMTP client or using a third-party API and a mail wrapper and then just sending an email. No, here you're going to understand how to correctly send emails on a fundamental and foundational level by someone who has mastered the technique because they've been using it from a very, very early stage at a very, very massive scale and fully understand the concept so they can teach it to you. Now, that person is not me, it's my good friend Dylan Beatty, who is an international speaker. I'm sure you've seen his Art of Code talk at NDC or many of his other videos now that he has a YouTube channel. I highly recommend you check it out too. And email is one of the topics where he's an expert at. He's such an expert actually that he has a 10-hour Dome Train course just on sending email in C#. If you're interested in that, I'm going to put a link in the description. We still have our summer sale. In fact, it's coming to an end. 30% across everything with code SUMMER30. And something else, our one-off purchases for our courses is going away at the end of summer as well. So if you want to get any of the courses and keep them forever with lifetime access, you can do that using the link below. After that, we're subscriptions only. Now, with all that out of the way, Dylan, please teach us how to send email in .NET.
Thanks, Nick, and hello, everybody. I'm Dylan Beatty. You might have seen me at a conference or right here on YouTube talking about all kinds of things. Algorithms, esoteric languages, text encoding, the history of the internet, or even singing comedy rock songs about programming. But deep down, I'm a developer. I use code to solve problems. I've been using C# and .NET since the first release of Visual Studio.NET nearly 25 years ago, and I've been building software that sends email even longer than that. I think email is an absolutely vital part of the modern internet. Sure, it has its idiosyncrasies, and yep, junk mail is a problem, but fundamentally, as an email user, I get to control how, where, and when I read my messages. I can filter them, I can archive them, I can choose whether to see adverts or not. I can do all kinds of things with email that I can't do with messages on WhatsApp or Teams or Slack. That's why I think it's so important that applications should be able to send email, and why it's important that they should do it properly. .NET and email has changed a lot over the years. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to get up and running with the latest libraries, tools, and patterns that are out there for sending mail with .NET here in 2025. Now, if you go online and you search for send email C#.NET, you'll find lots of very helpful articles, and many of those end up talking about a namespace called system.net.mail and a class called SMTP client. SMTP client ships with every version of .NET since 2.0. It is still there today, and if you're looking for a quick and dirty solution that doesn't install any libraries, it works just fine. The world has moved on since .NET 2.0, though, and if you look up the .NET documentation for system.net.mail.smtp client today, you'll see that the SMTP client type is obsolete on some platforms and not recommended on others. And if we scroll down a bit, you'll see this. Important. We don't recommend that you use the SMTP client class for new development because SMTP client doesn't support many modern protocols. Use MailKit or other libraries instead. Okay, let's take a look at MailKit. MailKit is a cross-platform mail client library built on top of MimeKit. And if we click through and take a look at MimeKit, we'll see that it's a C# library which may be used for the creation and parsing of messages using the multi-purpose internet mail extension, Mime. They're both open source projects supported by the .NET Foundation and published under the MIT license. Broadly speaking, MimeKit is the library we are going to use to build mail messages, and MailKit is the library we are going to use to send them. All right, let's write some code and see what they can do. Now, for these examples, I'm using .NET 9 on Windows 10. My terminal is PowerShell with Oh My Posh, and I'm using VS Code. If you're using macOS or Linux, this should all work exactly the same. And if you are still running .NET Framework, the .NET command line tools aren't available, but MailKit and MimeKit are .NET standard libraries, so the classes, interfaces, and methods will be the same. First, I'm going to create a new .NET console application. .NET new console -o for output, and I'll call it mail demo. Then we'll cd into our new mail demo project and install that package, .NET add package MailKit, and MailKit depends on MimeKit, so this will actually install both of the packages we need. All right, let's fire that up in VS Code. And now in program.cs, we are going to create a message. var message equals new MIME message. Who's it from? To set the sender, we are going to create a new mailbox address, dylan@dylanbeatty.net. And then we are going to add that mailbox address to the from collection. Yeah, from is a collection, which means in theory you can have an email message from more than one person. It's just one of the many weird edge cases where something is technically valid according to the SMTP specification, but you'll never find it used like that in real life. So we're going to stick to just the one sender for now. Let's create another mailbox address for the recipient, nick@dometrain.com, and then we'll add that address to the messages to collection. Our message subject is just a string. Let's do a video about email. Then we're going to give our message a body, which means creating a new text part, specifying that the encoding for this part is text format.plain. There's an enum for that in the mimekit.text namespace, and then assigning the text property. Hey Nick, let's do a video about how to get started sending email with C# and .NET. I think that would be awesome. What do you say? Dylan. Now, I'm using a C# feature here called a raw string literal. This is a relatively new thing. It was introduced in C# version 11 in 2022. By surrounding that string in 3 double quotes, I can create a multi-line string, and because my closing quote is indented here, the C# compiler will strip the leading white space off each line of the string. So the code looks like this, but the resulting value is this, which I think is really quite neat. Finally, we'll send it. Using var smtp equals new smtp client. Be careful here. When you go to import the namespace, you'll get a choice of 2, so make sure you go for the one from mailkit.net. Next, await smtp.connect async. We're going to connect to localhost on port 1025. Then await smtp.send async and give it our message. And finally, await smtp.disconnect async. And passing true here, that'll do a clean disconnect by sending an smtp quit command instead of just closing the connection. Finally, we'll console.writeline something so we know we're done. Okay, let's see if it worked. .NET run, and boom. Socket exception. No connection could be made because the target machine actively refused it. Program.cs, line 24. So what are we doing on line 24 of program.cs? Well, we're trying to connect to localhost on port 1025. And it's not really surprising that that doesn't work because there is no SMTP server running on localhost port 1025. And some of you folks might be thinking, hang on, what's an SMTP server? Come to think of it, what's SMTP? So it's probably time for a little bit of context here. Internet email is built on top of a protocol called SMTP, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. SMTP has been around since the early 1980s, and it's one of the most long-lived and successful networking standards in internet history. Very broadly speaking, if Alice wants to send an email to Bob, SMTP is how Alice's computer connects to Bob's computer and says, hey, I got an email here from Alice, can you put this in Bob's inbox? Over the intervening decades, we've come up with ways to get SMTP to do all kinds of things that weren't in the original spec. Unicode, authentication, images, attachments. But before we get into that, let's take a second to talk about how internet email actually works here in 2025. Because when we talk about an SMTP server, we could be talking about 2 very different things. Or rather, about 2 very different ways of using the same protocol. One for sending mail, the other for delivering mail. And those aren't the same thing. If you've ever had a parcel that got lost in the post, you'll appreciate the difference between something getting sent and something actually being delivered. Here is a map of the internet. Okay, not a proper map, but you get the idea. We got Outlook.com over here, Gmail's over here, Yahoo Mail's up here, here's Zoho, here's Proton Mail, and down here, this is us running our mail demo app. Now, if I had to send mail to somebody with a Gmail address, in theory, I could connect directly to Gmail's incoming SMTP server, and as long as I had set up all the correct DNS records to get through Gmail's anti-spam mechanisms, this would actually work. But It's like delivering a letter by driving all the way to somebody's house and putting it in their mailbox. It works, but it's not very efficient. And that only works for people with Gmail addresses. If I connect to Gmail and I say, hey, I've got mail here for bob@outlook.com, Gmail is going to tell me to go away. So if I wanted to deliver that email, I'd have to find outlook.com's SMTP server, connect to that, deliver that email, disconnect and repeat it for Proton and Zoho Mail and Yahoo. Now, I have actually built systems that worked like this, but unless you are selling email delivery as a service, trust me, you don't want to do that. What most applications do is to use an SMTP relay server. That way, our app can connect to a single SMTP server, hand over all of our mail, and let the internet worry about making sure it ends up in the right place. Now, to actually set up an SMTP relay server, you need to know a whole bunch of stuff about DNS records, anti-spam systems, security, authentication. We're not going to get into any of that today, but it is all covered in my Dome Train course, Sending Email with .NET from Zero to Hero. For this video, though, I want to focus on code, not infrastructure, and so we are going to use one of the most useful tools I have ever found for building and testing email systems. It's a program called MailPit. MailPit is a small, fast, low-memory, zero-dependency multi-platform email testing tool. It's open source, it's published under the MIT license, and it's available as a single static binary. It's just one file for Windows, macOS, and Linux. You can install MailPit somewhere on your system path, or for these examples, you can just run it directly from your project folder. It unzips to about a 22 meg binary, so I wouldn't check it into source control, but for now, we're just playing around with it to see how it works. Now, when you run MailPit, it starts two things. One is an SMTP server listening on port 1025, and the other is a web interface that's listening on port 8025. That syntax there, by the way, 2 colons inside square brackets, that is IPv6 shorthand for a network address made of all zeros. It means listen on every network address you've got. So let's open a browser, point it at localhost, port 8025, and look at that. MailPit is running, and it says there are no messages in your mailbox. So let's send one. I'm going to open another terminal pane here. The keyboard shortcut there is Shift-Alt+, which will split the Windows terminal vertically and give us 2 panes side by side. And then we'll switch back to our mail demo console application, .NET Run, and hey, this time it didn't blow up. So take a look in MailPit, and there it is. We've sent our first email using C# and .NET. Well, kinda. We haven't actually sent it anywhere yet, but that's okay. Don't worry about that for now. Now, let's switch back over to our mail demo application. And here, where we're setting our message body format to text format.plain, we're going to change that to text format.html. We'll .NET Run our application again. And now when we open it up in MailPit, that's our first HTML format email. Now, you open up the Raw tab here and take a close look at the mail headers. There's 2 new headers in there. The first specifies MIME version 1.0, and then there is a content type header saying this message is in text/HTML format, and it uses the UTF-8 character set. Content type text HTML, that should be fairly self-explanatory, and we don't need to worry about the UTF-8 bit just yet. But what is MIME version 1.0? MIME stands for Multipurpose Internet Mail Extension, and that header is telling us this message uses version 1.0 of the MIME standard. When MIME was first proposed back in the mid-1990s, everybody assumed that it would change over time. We'd get MIME 1.1, 2.0, and so on, but the spec never explained how that would work. Nathaniel Borenstein, who's one of the creators of MIME, has actually said it would be just about impossible for the internet to ever define a 2.0 or a 1.1. So if you see MIME version 1.0, you're looking at a MIME message. And if you see MIME version anything else, something weird is going on. The reason MIME exists is that even here in 2025, email still runs on SMTP, and SMTP is a 7-bit ASCII protocol. If your messages are 7-bit ASCII text, that's fine. But if you want to send somebody a PDF or a JPEG, or you want to write email in Ukrainian or Greek, or even just use the pound sterling currency sign, you're going to need MIME. MIME fundamentally gives us 2 things. First, it is a way to encode just about any kind of data as 7-bit ASCII and then decode it at the other end. Second, It's a way to include more than one piece of content in the same message so that we can have a single email message that contains a text version, an HTML version, embedded content, inline images, file attachments, so on. Let's modify our mail demo app to send a multi-part MIME message, and then we can open that up in MailPit and see what it looks like. MIMEKit includes a helper class for this called a body builder. So let's open up our program.cs. We'll delete our existing message body and then create an instance here, var bb equals new body builder. Then we're going to set the text body to the plain text version of our message. We'll just use hello world in plain text, and the HTML body to the HTML version of the message. Open paragraph, hello world, emphasis in HTML, close emphasis, close paragraph. Then we'll set the message body to be bb.toMessageBody. .NET run, mail sent, and now let's take a look in MailPit. Now we can see the rendered HTML version of our message, we can see the HTML source, and we can see the plain text version. Now take a look at the raw tab here. MIME version 1.0, and then this line, content type multi-part alternative, and then this boundary string. This is saying this message has multiple parts, and the parts are separated by this string. And sure enough, if you look closely, you'll see the boundary string repeats here, and here, and here. The first part here is the plain text version of our message. You see the content type header there? And the second part is the HTML version with the text HTML content type header. Now, I want to look at two more things before we wrap up. First, let's look at how do we add an attachment to an outgoing message. We're going to use a picture of a cat because this is the internet, and the internet was mainly invented so we could share cat pictures. So I'm going to save this to my project folder as cat.jpg, and then add a line to program.cs bb.attachments.add cat.jpg. Now we call .NET run again. Our message appears in MailPit, and there he is. Look at his little face. But what's more interesting here is in the raw tab. You see, MIME is actually a hierarchical format. What we've got now is a multi-part mixed message containing two parts, but part one is itself a multi-part alternative with its own boundary string. Part one contains our text plain and text HTML email bodies, and then part two contains our image attachment with the content type header, a content transfer encoding telling us how the JPEG has been encoded into 7-bit ASCII. In this case, it's using base 64 encoding, and a content disposition saying it's a file attachment and the file name is cat.jpg. Okay. One more thing to look at while we're here. What if instead of Big Ginger here being attached to our email, we want to display it inline as an image that is part of our HTML? This is where things get a little bit more involved. We'll take out that call to bb.attachments.add, and then up here, we are going to set var image entity equals builder.linkedresources.add cat.jpg. LinkedResources.add returns an instance of MIME entity, and MIME entity has a property called content ID, which we'll update by calling MIMEUtils.generateMessageID. Then we are going to build an HTML string. Hey, look, here's a picture of my cat, and then an HTML image tag. We'll set the image's source attribute to a CID URL. This is the URL format used to reference another piece of content contained in the same MIME message. We'll give it an alt tag for folks who can't see the image, and then set the message's HTML body property to our new string. .NET run one more time, and there we go. The image now appears as part of the HTML email. You'll notice it's still listed as an attachment. That is a MailPit thing. It's up to the mail client to decide whether inline images should also be listed as attachments or not. We don't have a lot of control over that. You'll also notice if you look in the HTML source tab, the image source is /API/v1. Again, that is just how MailPit has unpacked the email to render it in your browser. If you look at the raw tab, you'll see that the image source is a CID URL and then a unique identifier. Bear in mind, CID URLs, they're only meaningful in the context of the message they're attached to. There is no server or path specified, just the content ID of the attached file. All right, folks, we are going to wrap it up there for now. We've seen how to build multi-part emails using MIMEKit, how to send them using MailKit. We've got a local SMTP server up and running that we can use to test and troubleshoot things. And along the way, you've hopefully learned a bit more about SMTP, MIME, and what's actually going on under the hood. We've only just scratched the surface, though. To actually do this stuff for real, in production systems at scale, there's a whole lot more you'll need to figure out. Writing HTML emails by hand is incredibly tedious. There are libraries out there like MJML and Foundation, which can abstract away a lot of that complexity, but how do you get them to work with .NET? How do you combine them with something like Razor so you can generate emails based on templates and view models? How do you move the heavy lifting onto background threads so you can send email without slowing down your application's front end? How do you write unit tests for this stuff so you know your system's going to send the right mail to the right person? How do you choose an SMTP provider? How do you set up the DNS records for all of the various anti-spam mechanisms like SPF, that's the Sender Policy Framework, and DKIM, which is Domain Keys Identified Mail? The good news is I cover all of that and more in my course From Zero to Hero Sending Email with .NET, which is available exclusively at dometrain.com. So head on over and check that out. Folks, I hope you found all that interesting. Huge thanks, Nick, for having me on the channel. You can follow me over on my own YouTube channel, and I'm on the web at dylanbeatty.net. In the meantime, you'll take it easy out there. You look after each other. Remember to have fun, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.